Hi, I'm Victoria Redel, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about my book of poems, Paradise, my fourth book of poems. The book Paradise came about because it was after a long period of silence on my part, where I kind of couldn't imagine what kinds of poems I wanted to write, I needed to write, what I thought needed to be read. And I went actually into the woods to a residency with the idea that probably I would write nothing and maybe I would just walk in the woods. And then I set about for myself to just try each day to write a draft of a new poem without trying to think if it even was a poem, but just try to write something. And probably the first day, maybe the second day of working on these drafts, I started this poem and I thought, wow, who is this in the voice of? And it's a poem that's in this book, the second poem in the book, called The Garden. And quickly I realized it was the original garden, right? It was Adam and Eve speaking to us as we live now, and as we have erred. And it's a kind of mother-father reaching out, the generations reaching out towards us. And I thought, I've written persona poems, but why am I in the garden? But I was interested and I began to pursue it a little bit more, at which point I sort of made the connection that while I've written some in my life, or quite a bit actually, poems that have to do with my family's history of migration, of having to flee homes during the challenges of war, I started thinking about expulsions, the current expulsions, historical expulsions, of which Eden is probably the first expulsion, and then the larger questions beyond my family and the fact that we live on an earth with millions at this point, 6 million, more than 6 million people who are displaced from homes and their countries for reasons of war, for reasons of climate. So I began to explore that in this book and connect that. And as well, I began to think about migrations of the body, maybe in particular the woman's body, the changing shape of the woman's body. So that's really the origins of this book, the explorations. Well, why don't I start with the poem that I was speaking about, which is a poem called Garden. In the first weeks, we already knew this was history, that you'd speak of our nakedness, the flat grasses we wove and slipped over each other. First, there were frills of green leaf, stalks, tips too. Later came wild onion, the sharp tang of shoot and bulb, then peaches. Standing together in sunlight, of course praise and song. We hardly care that you would get so much of it wrong, that you would always speak of an apple, or claim that one of us was so persuaded by the snake. Darlings, we imagined you. Over and over how you would break each other, wound this garden. Only then, still licking the dried peach juice sticky down our fingers, did we know shame. This is a poem called Refugees, and it kind of goes, I'll give a few that kind of go into what I've been speaking about. During the course of writing this book, my father, who came to this country in 1940 as a political refugee, was in the process of dying. And this is a poem that came out of that time period. He would be in a hospital bed and at home and looking at the TV and watching whether it was the migrants in Calais or any of the other people who have fled their homes and have no homes. And this is a poem that arises out of that, and it's called Refugees. In the last days, when he could barely open his eyes, he'd look up from the hospital bed, lift his hand, and say, "That's me." And we said, "Yes, Papa, you're right here. No, he said, jabbing his fingers towards the television. Clusters of makeshift tents bent under gusting winds, a child held over the rail of a listing boat. Or he pointed at lines of young men squatting, then men slouched against stone walls, sweatshirts tied around waists, a few smoking cigarettes. No, he said, waving towards men browner and blacker than he. You think that's not me? He said. You, look again. This is a poem called If You Knew. One of the questions that's really chased me in my life and became alive again, as certainly alive to many of us over the course of these last months, and watching in the news people fleeing homes in the Ukraine, is this question of what we take, what given a short period of time a person leaves with. If You Knew. It's a poem in 2 parts, so I'll just pause at the second part. He wanted to take the muddy stream where he sang with frogs. She wanted to take dawn in the linden tree. They left a reed basket of wind. He wanted the resin of August. She left the feather grass of an evening walk. They left all the tender minutes unbuttoning her blouse. She wanted to pack the folded sun from the linen closet. He wanted to take the shuffle of her slippers on the stairs. She wanted her mother's fingers rummaging through the button box. He wanted the steps black soil. They left moss between stones, the steel winter light in the room where she sewed, the jiggle of a key in the front door. They left a cupboard of embroidered afternoons. What would you take? If you had a month, a week, an evening, an hour? If there were no one looking, no one saying, don't take that, why take that? What would you take if you thought it was temporary relocation, transient, provisional, short-term shelter? If you couldn't use your ATM card, your credit card, cash in your stock, sell your home, get a supervisor on the phone, charge your phone, if you couldn't keep your phone? What would you take if you knew you'd never come back? What would you take if you lost track of the children?